It is Friday, April 5th. Let's talk PlayStation. Welcome back, everyone, to another Solar Eclipse episode of LTPS. As always, let's begin with our PS Plus reminder. The April PS Plus Essential lineup is now live on PSN, so you can go ahead and claim those games. But you might want to hold off on playing Immortals of Aveum because Ascendant Studios actually outlined that they're going to be patching the game in the coming weeks to support AMD FSR3 frame generation on consoles, which will be a first for consoles. That, and they're also adding VRR support proper on PS5. So while PS5 can have VRR turned on as a more automatic setting, usually for frame pacing issues, we need it turned on from developers natively supported, which in this case will be good considering that Digital Foundry is expecting them to target above 60 FPS, I believe, on console, which in that case you are going to want a VRR compatible display to try and smooth out the game's probably expected fluctuations when it's not going to be hitting 120 proper on PlayStation 5. But if you're playing the game now, for example, and you're a little bit bothered by the blurriness of it or the inconsistent frame rate, then yeah, you're probably going to want to hold off. So at least that patch is planned to show up in a somewhat timely manner for this game, now being available on PlayStation Plus. Now, in other PS Plus news, if you remember from, I think it was last week where we brought up that there's a Star Wars PS1 game that showed up on the PSN backend, so we know about one game coming to Premium this month, but now we know about two more games coming Extra that Sony confirmed themselves, and their brand new debuts launching right into PS Plus Extra and Premium. So first would be Dave the Diver, so we knew that game was announced for PlayStation. It's coming on April 16th, and it will be available day one on PS Plus Extra for PS4 and PS5. And then a week later, Tales of Kenzera Zhao, the 2.5D story-driven action exploration game that's launching on April 23rd, but that will also be available on PS Plus Extra. So it won't debut right then and there for the entire April lineup, but it will come a week later available on PS Plus. So definitely a nice bonus to have two day one debuts on PlayStation Plus. Happens occasionally, and it's great to see two, I think, highly anticipated games because Dave the Diver has had so much positive reception since it came out. And then for Tales, seems like that's also got a lot of buzz going on for that game when it's coming out fairly soon. So nice to have two debuts on PS Plus. Happens occasionally. We've got two for this month. But moving on to our next news story, we have a new firmware for the PlayStation Portal 2.0.6, which this one, the patch notes don't say anything outside of we've improved the system performance, but it does appear anecdotally from a number of people on Reddit and just speaking with people, it does seem like the image quality has been improved by a noticeable amount. Right now, it could be a placebo effect, but people are saying that it appears as though there is an improvement to the image quality, or at the very least, the consistency of the image quality, so there's not nearly as many drops in the compression quality when you're trying to stream the game. At least for the short session that I did, it appeared as though it was looking better than what I've seen so far. But again, it's hard to sort of judge when you know there probably is a little bit of placebo going on there. But maybe Sony did in the back end adjust the bit rate for it or something, because that's the problem with their official remote play app or the PlayStation Portal, is that really the better option is the third-party stuff with Chiaki on the Steam Deck or something, right, where you can actually modify the bit rate and really have better control over the video signal being streamed over, which that's how you get a better experience outside of PlayStation products, ironically. But a lot of people are still in agreement that there is occasional micro stutters as well. But really the other big news story here is that if you remember the Google engineer Andy Nguyen, where they'd put out on X that they were able to get the PPSSPP emulator running on the PlayStation Portal, and they didn't say they were planning on releasing it soon, but they did say that they might demonstrate it on video, which did not happen. Well, now they've confirmed, and I quote here, they responsibly reported the issues to PlayStation, and the bugs were fixed on 2.0.6. So that was one little back-end thing, a part of the firmware that we obviously wouldn't know unless Andy put this out there, which there's been some, discussion around this, because for some it's like, why would you do that? Why didn't you release or disclose the vulnerability? And, you're telling Sony this, so therefore they're going to be able to close up the exploit before anybody can take advantage of this. But the thing is, he's a Google engineer. It wouldn't really be a good look if he's, disclosing these things. And moreover, it's part of the bug bounty program. This is basically what they do quite often. So what Sony and many other big companies will do is have a bug bounty program where if you do respond responsibly break into their hardware and discover vulnerabilities, if you report it and disclose it to the platform holder, or again, any other major company, they'll usually give you a pretty nice payout. In this case, Sony, I think, does 10 grand, which I believe is a pretty standard market rate for that kind of thing. It's usually thousands if you can discover a vulnerability that is worth the company closing up. But from their point of view, it's a matter of like, hey, there's really only a few week difference anyway. If we disclose it, they're still going to close it anyway, and it's only going to be a few weeks up until Sony does ship a patch to, close it up. So it's more a matter of like, there's not really a major issue here, and they do say that they will disclose it eventually, so the vulnerability is out there. But the caveat with the portal is that you shouldn't run out and buy a portal right away. That way you can get it on stock firmware, and that way you can use the vulnerability when it gets released at some point, because at least for a portal, if it's like stock right out of the box, you can't end up using it at all, to where you can probably access the vulnerability anyway, because it's going to want to take on a firmware update. So unless you have one right now that has already gone through the initial setup process and you don't update it, then you might be able to use this vulnerability whenever it does get released to the public. Which even then, it's a bit dubious at best as to how well PPSSPP runs on the PlayStation Portal. So I consider this not really a major deal, but it's something where this happens more often than you think, and really it works out better for Andy to collect the bug bounty, and the vulnerability will still be disclosed at some point, right? We're really only talking about a few week difference from whether he released it or not, so might as well take the bag, obviously. It's a very common practice nowadays. Next up, developer ShiftUp of Stellar Blade has been very busy recently. Of course, they're getting ready to ship this game very soon, and probably doing some post-launch support. We don't know if that's actual DLC, but we do at least know that they are planning to, potentially do a new Game Plus mode or a photo mode down the road that's not going to be available on day one. But we do know that it seems like they have very open interest in doing a sequel. So when speaking with Famitsu, the ShiftUp CEO, Kim Hyung-tae, responded to a question about the character's age in the game, and he says that they're all adults, but if you want to learn more about their age and I guess their background, then that's going to be revealed in the next game. So he's just openly putting it out there that they do have this kind of roadmap for possibly doing more. And this also coincides with other headlines about how ShiftUp is hiring for various positions on what appears to be probably a different new AAA title developed on Unreal Engine for PC, console, mobile. Now that's something where that could really go either way. I mean, we have to remember that Stellar Blade is not a proper PlayStation Studios game under that umbrella and banner. Sony is not, they're publishing, but they don't own the IP, so there could certainly be a stipulation that maybe the game is allowed to go to other platforms at a certain point, or at the very least, it's, only this game's locked down in perpetuity, but maybe they plan to ship the sequel on other platforms or something, which that would not surprise me, given that right now, ShiftUp is very clearly in a position where they're trying to grow, perhaps a little bit too fast. I mean, they are in a position where they've got the mobile game going, and that's recurring revenue from Nikkei Goddess of Victory. This game has a lot of really good positive press going around. It seems like the pre-order numbers are probably very good for them, and they've got the financial backing of Sony and their distribution channels, so they probably feel very safe with Stellar Blade, and then we know they're also looking to go public as well. So it appears as though they're really trying to scale up, which is fine, but with game studios, we can see how that can go south, and with any company, if you grow too fast, sometimes that's hard to manage. And also, going public implies that they're going to have a lot more pressure to start delivering, just that, growth. So to scale up is something where I would feel a little bit nervous about ShiftUp's future. It's not like they can't handle it, but we've seen how this can be very troublesome for certain studios, especially if they do have shareholders to answer to. Moving on to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, where recently an issue came up with the Platinum Trophy where it was possible for quite a while, but now it's impossible on the most recent patch, where one of the later side quests, where it's called Can't Stop, Won't Stop, there's the G-Bike minigame, and that's required for the Platinum. So that's something where Square has acknowledged the issue, and they will be addressing it in the next patch. Not sure when that's going to be available, but it's something where you have to be mindful of, I guess, how you own the game, because if you you have a physical copy, then you could delete the game, reinstall it, and just make sure that you don't install the latest patch because it will pull it from PSN. So that's like a great benefit with the physical discs sometimes, is being able to reject patches. But if you are a digital owner, then your console, I would assume, is always online, and usually if you launch the game, at the very least, if you're not using rest mode, it will then immediately pull the patch. You don't know this problem exists until it's already installed. So, and then you can't delete and reinstall, because then if you pull it from the PlayStation Store, you're just going to get the full package right then and there with the most recent patch. So having said that, if you want to get your platinum, then just don't engage with that side quest. Don't even attempt it right now, and wait for Square to get this addressed. Unfortunate sometimes when this happens for platinum trophies, but at least the game is active, released, and Square is aware of the issue. Now, this story is very interesting because it kind of goes back to something I said right when this account popped up. If you remember the Silk Knight account on X, where they initially popped up, seemingly out of nowhere, but going through their very small account history, you could see that they had put up the correct materials for a state of play, pointing out the 4 games for Microsoft going multi-platform, and also a few days prior putting out there that the Ghost of Tsushima PC release announcement was coming very soon, and then they were correct about all those things. And so oftentimes we see that new accounts out of nowhere will pop up, they'll get a lot of attention, and then sometimes they start saying more things, and then it becomes a little bit dubious. So what happened this past week is that this account, again, was saying a lot of stuff, really to the point where I thought it was genuine. We would have like 5-10 news stories just simply off this account. So now they're talking about PlayStation's release announcement plans, how they're changed, and that Sony wants to announce games with a 2-year minimum before they come out, and that Sucker Punch was supposed to announce their game last year, but something changed, and something about Horizon 3 and Last of Us PC again, and they're responding to a bunch of people talking about things they claim to know or not know about. But Bloomberg's Jason Schreier has now called out the account, putting them on blast, saying these are false claims, and they specifically point out that these accounts can at times hear about a back-end or retail leak, and then get more bold with their claims and guesses. Which, if you remember, that is exactly what I said about this account when it came out after like a week or two. I forget the timing exactly, but it was something where they were correct initially about a few things. So, at least on the channel, it's like, okay, we'll humor you for the time being. Let's see where this goes. And then immediately it was a matter of like saying all these things about Sony in a very broad manner, and also Square Enix. And it's like, okay, red flag immediately, because this happens so often. I don't know why certain accounts insist on doing this. It's so weird to chase that kind of internet clout in the first place, but it is something where very much the initial info is good. It always comes from somewhere, and it's usually like, as I say, like a regional marketing side. That's where the security can be the most lax, or at least the barrier is pretty small there. So it can come from that side where the materials are being prepared for the PS blog or something, or it could be a YouTube unlisted video. So again, to Jason's point, it could be something on the back end that's data mined, or maybe a retail leak that nobody spots until it goes away or something. Whatever the case is, right? But that stuff will happen. Then it will go into a Discord server shared around by 20, 30 people. Then it goes to another Discord server, and you've got a lot of people that, in theory, they don't really have a platform to share the info, but sometimes they'll make a new account and it'll be discovered, and that's how we have a circumstance like this. But usually it's something where the information will travel to a well-known account that does have a platform, and then we'll get a story from somebody on a podcast, or whether it's a separate YouTube video or something. But like usually there's somebody that will at that point claim the credit for the initial rumor. But that's also where like the information can be so dubious that for a lot of people they end up having this like 50-50 or unreliable reputation because they share everything they hear about on Discord. That's kind of where all this stuff goes and how it's been happening lately. But the point is, the initial info can at times very much be good when it's like close to the announcement, because it's always the marketing side. Very few times it's going to be directly from a developer or something. Jason typically with his reporting he'll be sourcing from developers at studios. That's why he often really doesn't ever report on major things unless it's like a big story, and he's got many accounts from developers and not simply the marketing side, where that's more on the lower rung for these kind of discussion topics. But having said that, yeah, we humored them initially, but, if they're going to be spitballing all these crazy broad things that are like very safe guesses, or at the very least, it's like totally reasonable speculation, things that anybody would probably agree with, and you've got folks that are like asking questions as if there's really some sort of genie in a bottle here that's ready to actually grant something. It's just, that's where the stuff always goes. So at least here on LTPS, we'll always initially humor accounts that do have something that is good. But the second they go into this territory, it's like, okay, well, we're done with you. So we'll always try and cover this stuff with a fine-tooth comb and try to avoid this account for the time being, unless something genuine, again, pops up. But if you see a story, go into the headline and read more, and they're sourcing this account, then I would say maybe just look the other way. They probably don't know anything. Moving on to a new PS5 Pro rumor coming from Insider Gaming, where they are claiming to know the developer requirements for a studio to get the PS5 Pro Enhanced label on their games, much like we saw with PS4 Pro, where if a studio did support PS4 Pro, then they got a little label on the retail box art, or also being listed on the PS Store as a PS4 Pro Enhanced game, which Insider Gaming does note that, internally it's still called Trinity, so technically it would be Trinity Enhanced, but by the time this thing has an official name, it will probably be a PS5 Pro label. And so apparently we do know what studios will have to do in order to get that label, which is the following: PSSR upscaling resolution to 4K, consistent 60 frames per second, or adding and increasing ray tracing effects. And there's more lenient and detailed requirements being the following: increased target resolution for titles that run a fixed resolution on the standard console, increasing target maximum resolution for titles that run at a variable resolution on the standard console, increasing target frame rate for titles that target a fixed frame rate on the standard console, or the inclusion of PS5 Pro ray tracing effects. Now, I also say or there because this is probably similar to PS4 Pro in that you don't have to do all those things. As far as I know, you only have to do one or two of these things to really get that label. I mean, we saw, towards the end of PS4, which, it's still going on, but, with PS4 Pro, there's like nearly 300 PS4 Pro Enhanced games. There's a lot. And so it is something where for a studio, it's still going to be worth doing, right? Because the thing is, even though we can say all day, every day that PS5 Pro will be a low volume console, it's not going to sell millions and millions, it's not going to be a huge ratio of the overall PlayStation 5 install base. With the current landscape of the software ratio favoring digital, retail space, sure, but really you want that kind of visibility on the store, and Sony is more than likely initially going to have a separate page on the PlayStation Store where there's PS5 Pro Enhanced games, and that will be a pretty small list. So probably going to be worth it for a lot of studios to try and get a patch out or ship their games with a PS5 Pro setting. That way they can be part of that visibility where it's, precious. With the sheer volume of games coming out, you really want to do everything possible to make sure that your game is front and center on the PlayStation Store, or at the very least, it's easily discoverable. That, and we're hearing that Sony is trying to make the tools very easy to actually use and integrate into your games right now. That way, it's not eating up all these resources to, make this setting on a game that conceivably is not going to reach most of the audience. But studios in good faith are always going to try and make the best out of their games anyway. So it's really kind of a win-win-win scenario for everybody involved, for those that buy a PS5 Pro, the developers making it, and of course Sony. So these all sound pretty fair, and I suspect that it really is something where you only have to do one or two of these things to get the label. Next up, we finally have a rumor for a PlayStation Showcase, or possibly a State of Play, based on the fact that we're getting closer and closer to May anyway. That's what they did last year in late May. Also, Summer Games Fest being close as well, which even then Sony would show up at that event with some announcements probably. But this was, again, coming from Jeff Grubb, so a year later, he's still, again, mentioning, like he did last year, that he's heard a PlayStation event is coming in May. He mentioned this on the Giant Bombcast, where he's unsure if it's a State of Play or a Showcase, but he seems to be leaning more towards a Showcase given last year, which this conversation was also in relation to the Silent Hill 2 remake getting an ESRB rating officially, which that in itself is news because, for a while it's been a big curiosity as to when that game's going to release, right? We did get a combat trailer, but what was surprising is that they didn't say anything about it, just, coming soon. Like, really, we still don't have a release date for that game, so with it being a timed exclusive on PS5, it would be something where it would be part of Sony's presentation. So we would have to wait for Sony to probably have another presentation. And you got to figure with it being, a possible Showcase in May, that is where they would do it. That alongside, as we've discussed for over a year now, it's a tired conversation at this point, but we know the company has things they could say and could talk about. More a matter of what those things will be out of all their first party and possible second party partnerships. You got to expect that maybe we'll see a new trailer for Until Dawn, maybe a confirmed release date announcement. Same for Concord. Maybe Team Asobi will finally show off this Astrobot game that I'm expecting, and a handful of other announcements from that could be Sucker Punch for Ghost of Tsushima, the next entry there. Maybe Santa Monica will show off more of their new IP, or rather they'll actually do a proper teaser of the new IP. Also Insomniac could show off a new trailer for Wolverine, or maybe announce the other game that we're expecting from them in 2025. So there's a lot of ways this can go. Not saying everything is going to be there, but we could see a lot of those things. And then also going into Summer Games Fest, they do still bring one or two announcements for a Jeff Keighley show, sometimes more. Maybe a small PC thing, maybe a larger teaser. We just we can kind of run wild with this, but what we can safely say is that we are in a peak year of the console. 2025 is also really being lined up for what should be a good year for a lot of these first-party teams, not only showing off their games, but some of them launching them as well. So, we kind of felt that way with last year, but now we are getting to that point where it's like we should probably be seeing some big stuff, and I think we probably are due for it relatively soon. And it seems like we only have to wait about a month and a half, 2 months. Now, this one's more of a PSA for those that didn't see this or when we talked about it on LTPS, but for the Knights of the Old Republic remake. So we did find out recently that from the Embracer sale, the game actually went with Saber Interactive. So when Embracer sold off Saber, they're still working on it. They're saying that it's alive and well, although that's all they're saying. So it seems like it's still going to be a very long time until that game ever sees the light of day, if it actually does. But in relation to LTPS, we don't cover this game anymore because we had already heard from a few months ago when Sony was, delisting all the trailers and things. It seemed like the word there was that Sony walked away from it, given that there's been some turmoil with the project being handed over to Saber and it being like basically restarted, and it was going to be far away until the game ever came out. So Sony probably just backed away from the whole funding and publishing deal of it being an initial timed exclusive on PlayStation 5. So in relation to LTPS, we're not covering the game anymore as it no longer relates to PlayStation's business dealings. But if you are still interested in that game, then it does seem like it is still alive, and maybe it will come out, which by the time it does come out, it will probably either have a completely different publishing partner with maybe another platform holder, or in this case we would just safely assume it's probably going to be multi-platform day one. Next up, let's go over some Helldivers 2 news, where, kind of like the KOTOR story, we're really not going to be able to cover Helldivers 2 that often anymore, considering it updates so frequently as a live service title. So even though it is a proper PS Studios game, with me not even actively playing it and being in the know, you're probably better off getting this info from somewhere else, but we'll cover some of the major updates here, that being that there was a new patch recently where it increased the level cap from 50 to 150, so they really upped it right away, which is pretty nutty. They've also added these planetary hazards like blizzards and sandstorms. There's been a lot of balancing changes related to the enemy spawn points, objectives, weapons. Also, the automatons have giant walking mechs now, and there's new war bonds. And so again, like, the game updates so much, but it seems like it was really, or it sounds like it's taking on just a lot of rapid changes to a degree that, as you're playing the game and these things go live, or people alter game files and they make them go live early, but you can really encounter these insane things that the studio behind the scenes definitely did have ready to go, or at least they were actively working on and were ready to have it up and running within a month, 2 months. And because again, the game came out and they didn't really expect all this huge success with the server load, and then the CEO saying, well, now we can get back to our roadmap, and it seems like this is the roadmap, which is kind of insane. So this is turning into a pretty big staple in the PlayStation Live service roadmap. It seems like Sony did, at the very least, nail one of these games so far, and there are still many others that we are expecting. Now, in other related live service news, we also have the second annual study done by the analyst firm Newzoo, where they're looking at all the gaming platforms and showing off the top 10 games played on these platforms ranked by their average monthly active users. And we can see, rather unsurprisingly, it's dominated by live service titles. So really the only outlier is Switch, where there are a handful of, single player or, first party games from Nintendo. But across PC, PlayStation, and Xbox, the average age for these games is over 6 years. And it's, the typical suspects being Fortnite, GTA 5, Warzone, EA Sports FC, Roblox, which is a recent release on PlayStation, but it still was able to easily crack the top 10 now. Rocket League, Minecraft, Fall Guys on there too. So, and I like Fall Guys a lot. Happy to see that still doing pretty well. But yeah, they're all still going strong. And again, average age over 6 years, which is insane. But it is something where they're free to play. So by sheer virtue of the accessibility, they are going to have a lot of people constantly playing them. And also they're meant to be played that way. They see continual updates over time with new content, sometimes free, sometimes season passes. And that gets into how they're monetized, but that's still new ongoing content. They're also primarily designed around a gameplay loop that encourages people to play for long periods of time. So it's not surprising, but still for some folks eye-opening, and it shows, more often than not. That's why publishers, even though it's incredibly saturated and these projects can be very risky and take a long time to put together, millions of dollars, it can still sometimes be worth it if you find an audience that can consistently keep that game going, playing, and monetizing that audience. So there is still a lot of value for live service even nowadays. Moving on to the former president and CEO of Sony Interactive Entertainment, Jim Ryan, where he is now officially retired, and that means the interim CEO right now is Hiroki Totoki. But for the time being, we did have Jim do a final send-off and appearance on the PlayStation podcast, the official PlayStation podcast, speaking with Sid Schumann, the Senior Director of Content Communications at Asahi, and it was a very casual conversation, nothing too crazy, but we do have some items of note. So one thing that Jim was asked from Sid is that, in terms of these major generations throughout PlayStation history, tell me something that you think of immediately. And so for the early thousands, that being the PS2 era, Jim said 160 million, as in that's how many PlayStation 2s they sold. That was the thing that came to his mind right away, and that was basically it. Moved on from there. But this became a point of contention online because for the longest time, over a decade, we really only knew of the official number from Sony back in 2012 or somewhere around there, where it was 155 million sold. So there's about 5 million more that apparently Sony did move. But there has always been that discrepancy because the 155 million is a safe number to always say in reference. But we know Sony then ceased manufacturing about a year later. So there is conceivably more PS2 consoles they did sell. It was always a matter of we just never knew exactly how much more. Some people thought maybe 156, maybe up to 158, maybe 159, but I think for many it was a matter of it never being 160. And so there has been some arguments online about this number, that Jim Ryan's lying as if that's really a thing. Why would he lie about that? If anything, maybe he's rounding up from what is a very comfortable number of maybe around 159 point something, and so it's just easy to say 160. Having said that, I think it's kind of a useless argument anyway. I mean, we always knew that they sold a little bit more, so it really is a matter of, I guess, getting a more accurate number. So maybe close to 160. Maybe they did, just barely chop over 160. I know people that really follow the install base for consoles have always sort of speculated that it was around 158 to 159. So really the 155 was always kind of a safe official number. But yeah, it's weird how so many people were arguing about that. I will say this is a great time for me to, bring up this rant because I never have a place to do this. So many people often bring up that PS2 was a cheap DVD player and that somehow was accounting for this massive portion of the install base, which I never understood because yes, PS2 was a DVD player. Yes, that was a great feature that maybe was justifying the purchase for a lot of people, and more often than not, everyone always references an uncle or somebody they had that they had known that bought a PS2 because it had a DVD player or they used it primarily for DVDs. That's all well and good, anecdotally speaking, but to make this suggestion that, millions of consoles for PS2's total install number was they were primarily used as DVD players, that's just not even close to true. At the time, DVD players were still similarly priced to PS2, right? So PS2 still had that utility of also being a game player, so it was probably the better option for a lot of households. But, it was still, I think, for the vast majority of people buying PS2s, they were playing video games on it, and that's applicable and, verifiable, I should say, by looking at the total games sold on PS2, which is like 1.5 billion software, which is not only a lot of games, but more so the attach ratio. So, like, the actual ratio of games being sold per console is quite high. PS2's at like nearly 10 games per every system sold, which makes the very obvious suggestion that for the vast majority of PS2s that were sold, they were going to consumers that were planning on playing video games on it, more than likely, as a rough average. So, I don't know. I never liked that assumption. Like, oh, well, it's a cheap DVD player. That's why it's the #1 console sold. No, I'm sorry. That just doesn't hold as much weight, I think, as people tend to claim it to be. Now, the other items that came out of that conversation is, one, this was just really funny, where Sid asked Jim, what was the funniest thing that you can think of or that happened within this company or something like that? And Jim said the PS3 Boomerang controller. he actually started laughing a lot. So, that controller was very much part of PlayStation history, where it was a very unusual looking controller that appeared uncomfortable, although I and most people have not had the chance to hold one, so we have no idea how uncomfortable or silly it really was. But I thought that was funny that was the thing he picked on, is, oh yeah, the Boomerang controller, that thing was ridiculous. But the other thing he mentioned is that, PlayStation right now, they're at the top of their game. He's leaving the company in a very good position, and he said that PS5 is on track to be their most successful platform ever in a number of different vectors, as in across different metrics that the company is tracking. It is, well above PlayStation 5, which is also verifiable from recent corporate strategy meetings, where we can see average spend per box and, PS Plus subscriber engagement and how often people are buying games and MTX stuff being sold from the store. It's all higher on average versus PlayStation 4. So even though PS5 in terms of console sales is still trailing slightly behind PS4, he's just saying, officially across a number of different metrics, it's on track to be their most successful platform, which it does appear to be, obviously. It's fascinating to hear that from Jim. He did mention that right now he's really going to cool down. He does have things planned, but it's really about just spending more time with his family, which, for him doing 30 years at this company and living in London, but having to, try and coordinate with people in California and also Japan, I can see where he's coming from. Probably was a very stressful job once you get into those later years of your career. So at least we can, say Jim's going to probably finally enjoy his time away from the company finally. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or X, and if you would like to win a $10 PSN code, it is so simple. Follow the link down below, enter the Gleam giveaway, and supporting this channel a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week, because I'm trying to help pay for your games. Those are all the stories from this past week that I wanted to talk about with you all, and our Monday video was a very goofy, casual conversation on April Fool's Day, going over that Facebook listing that popped up and went a little bit viral for what is a PlayStation Experience trailer being sold 10 years later, where it had PSP and PS2 stuff on it. I don't know, I just thought that would be silly to do, but moreover, that saved me some time for some other videos that I'm working on that are taking a lot longer, which I think many of you know what I'm trying to get done there. So got to give me some time, but otherwise, that's all I've got for you this week. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.